Welcome to another episode of Data Gurus. I am Sima Vasa, your host. So excited to welcome Jason Cohen, who is the CEO and founder of Simulacra. Did I say that right?
You did, Simulacra.
Yeah, that's awesome. Welcome, Jason. How you doing?
Very good. I'm happy to be here.
I'm glad you're here as well. Um, we have lots to talk about, but I would love for you just to talk a little bit about how you got to this point and founding your company. I think you have really interesting past and um, the way you collected data around the world. If you could just share a little bit of your experience, I think that'd be fantastic.
Yeah. So I started as a professional tea taster. I spent a whole bunch of time in mainland China, Taiwan, Korea, and Japan. I went to Penn State originally to study political science. I promptly did not do that. Instead, I started a tea research group that, like everything I touched, became a little more than it had planned. And so I
Yeah.
started an
I'd
interdisciplinary.
imagine the intensity was probably more than you had planned.
Yeah, yeah. So I started a interdisciplinary tea research institute called the Tea Institute at Penn State, where I had 30-something students, 5 fields of study. And I did my research in sensory science, science of taste, and pretty quickly found that I didn't like the math and the techniques that they were using, that it was still basically frequentist statistical hypothesis testing. And I thought to myself, we this is in the early days of AI, it's still machine learning at that point, right? It's around 2009, 2010 when this really started. And I said, we could work ground up. We could build models. We could actually make predictions that come true. And so I moved me and all my research to machine learning and AI. And when that started to work, we could actually make predictions around what people taste and like and dislike in food and beverage products. We spun that out into my first company. And amazing company is called Gastrograph AI. I love all of the technology and the work that we built there. I was founder CEO there for 10 years. The company was recently acquired by Nielsen's IQ. Basie's division runs all of Nielsen's creative product
Congratulations.
AI.
Yeah,
Thank
that's
you.
amazing.
Yes, one exit down. But that company was incredibly difficult company to run, because it was a proprietary data play on predominantly CPG products. So we actually had teams that went out around the world to collect data. We had standing panels, constantly people tasting products in New York, Shanghai, Romania. And then we had a team that literally circled the world, recruiting 80 to 100 people, had them taste 80 to 100 products over 5 days, shut that down and moved on. And this was a logistical nightmare.
Sure, of
Like you had
course.
people calling you, like I got mugged in here in Argentina. I got my phone stolen in Mexico. I got food poisoning in Poland. All sorts of crazy things all the time. It's not really what a software company, what a
What's the
traditional
deal
software
with? Yeah, exactly.
wants to be doing. But it worked, right? I mean, it created there was emergent properties of scale that no one had ever considered before when it came to sensory perception, right? You think about food and flavor, and people do their product testing, and the old saying, what'll they think in Peoria, right?
Yeah,
They
exactly.
do their product testing in rural Illinois or Chicagoland or wherever, or Ohio, and but there was really emergent properties of scale. Really what we were doing is we were building a foundation model for flavor before that concept, before that term had become applicable, before anyone knew anything about it. And so by collecting all of this massive data, we could translate across different demographics. We could micro-target certain segments. And this wasn't off-the-shelf AI because, in traditional AI, you normally have some verifiable ground truth. You can say, this is right, this is wrong. But like, if you were to say, if I ask you, do you taste lemon? What are my options, right? I believe you or I don't believe you. But
Right,
what we
exactly.
did is we built up this cascading hierarchy, to say, well, you've probably tasted a lemon before. That's a very common flavor. And, but you're a novice taster. You don't spend your time thinking about flavor, right? And so we can balance out all of these factors. We can come to some probability distribution if you taste lemon. And by doing that we used a lot of topological machine learning. By doing that in a way, we could actually pinpoint exactly where products were in flavor space. Um, that said, and what inspired me to start this company was, in doing that research, what we found is that there was no way in advance of doing a study of of knowing whether or not we would have the appropriate or the correct data, right? Sometimes you have data loss because your survey takers are button mashers. Sometimes you have data loss because, you did this, you paid, 50, 60, 70, $80,000 to do a survey in Poland, and you left out orange juice. You had no idea that orange juice was so important.
Right.
Right?
Right.
So you don't have
Yeah.
coverage.
Yep.
Sometimes, you have coverage, but you were in market this month, and next month everyone reformulates, or the biggest company in that market reformulates. A new product gets launched by a competitor, and you don't have it, right? So you never knew exactly if you would have enough data, if you'd have the right data, if you'd have the right coverage. And so I started to think about this and say, well, wait a minute, this is not just the case for us. This is true for everyone. And we started to ask the customers that we were working with, and what percentage of the time do you get statistically actionable results? And it turns out now we know that it's less than 50% of the time. Less than half of studies return statistically actionable results that are valid, that have coverage, that are directional, that you can make a decision off of. Right. And these are expensive studies, even online studies, $10,000, $20,000. But for central location testing studies, anywhere that you have people actually coming in panel manner.
See the person. Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
I mean, average, Gastrograph had one of the lowest costs in the industry. I won't say what it is because I don't know if that's a secret or not. Um, but average company is out there spending around like $8 per complete. Some companies are spending a lot more, and even n equals 200, 300 person survey, right, is already going to be in the tens of thousands. So um, running that and then getting no actionable results. And so what do companies do? They've been responding to this in two ways. They've either been running less research, which we don't think is the solution, right? But I mean, it makes sense. The thought process makes sense. They say, well, I'm not going to be able to make a decision off this anyway half the time, right? Like, I'm just going to go with my gut. The second thing that they do is they take that data and they look at directional results. They say, well, we got 13 people who gave this product a higher score, and they all seem to be young men. So that's what we're going to go with.
Maybe
right?
that's what we'll target. Right.
Yeah, maybe that's what we'll
Got it.
target.
Okay.
So the idea for this company is using new techniques of synthetic data generation as we allow companies to run infinite causal scenario models on top of that data, whether it was actionable, whether it was statistically significant or not. What we do is we learn from that specific survey, and then we show them the most likely path to the outcome that they wish that they got. So they ran a product development study and they wanted their product to be most preferred. They didn't get that. They put it into our platform. They say, what could I have done in order for this product to be the most preferred? Did I have to change the audience? Did I have to change the formula? Did I have to change consumer behaviors or channel? All right. And this is true for product development, but we're working just as well in media marketing, advertising. We're working just as well in consumer behavior, and particularly things like shopping cart, shopping studies, purchase intent, pricing and promo in October, November, December. And yeah,
And
that was
what data is fueling the engine, right? And that people can go in and query, what might happen in the future in terms of product tasting and acceptance.
So it's a great question. We take a pretty controversial view on this. So there's a lot of companies out there right now that are talking about synthetic data that are using foundation models, that are using generally either Llama or Qwen, one of the Chinese models, or one of the paid models like OpenAI or Anthropic. And the problem with that is that data is unattributed. When you think about the way that LLMs are trained, right? They've read just about all the text on the internet, and we know from certain lawsuits that they took a bunch of books as well. But the data is not labeled with the types of things that you care about. When you're reading text on the internet, when the LLM's scraping Reddit, it doesn't know if that person's a Coke or a Pepsi drinker. It doesn't know if that person eats Fritos or Doritos or Lay's. It doesn't know what the consumption habit is, right? And so when you then prompt an LLM and say, okay, well, I want young urban consumers who eat Frito, right? What does it do? It gives you something that looks right, but actually then measure that it's not representative of any population that actually exists. So we've gone entirely the other direction. We build models zero shot without using any publicly available open source data. So we take a company's survey, a specific survey, and we learn all the causal and internested relationships within that data. And so then when we run these scenario models and predictions, it's always based on their populations, their screeners relevant to their products, their competitors. It's whoever they decided to recruit, whether that group is balanced or imbalanced, right? One of the things that people frequently do on our platform is use it to rebalance better than weighting. So any of the major survey providers, what they do now is they go out and they attempt to hit a quota. They don't hit the quota. And so then they apply weights. So they say, well, we wanted 50-50 men, women. We didn't get that. We got 60-40 men, women. And so we're going to weight. Yeah, we're going to weight this one down. We're going to weight this one up. Weighting, univariate weighting on a bimodal variable like gender, probably fine. Multivariate weighting on multivariate variables, almost certainly wrong, right? Weighting assumes the monotonic linear combination that you can linearly interpolate between. Absolutely wrong for basically anything other than the easy one, gender. So one of the things that customers use our platform for is reweighting, and then you can run scenarios on the properly weighted data.
Got it. Got it. And so is it a custom solution that you build on a per client basis? Because each client has different data, right?
Yeah, so that's the new techniques with the AI. So we build a model zero shot, but all of that happens in approximately real time behind the scenes. So it is a self-service SaaS platform. They log on, they drag and drop a data set into it, and in about under a minute, most of the time, the AI goes and learns through
Oh, through the data.
that
Yeah.
data, and it gives
Okay.
them back a causal model that they can then query, condition, and run scenarios on top of.
Very cool. Very cool. And in terms of going in and understanding, like, okay, you're going to get your target, you're going to see what flavors appeal to what audience based on the data that are collected. How do you get to the point and what data informs, if how could I have been more successful? Like, do you pull from the company data as like point of sale data? Like, how do you make that leap in terms of recommended or guided strategies to what could have you done? What could have you done differently?
Yeah. So there's two levels of answering that question. So sometimes customers have disjointed data sets. And one of the big things that we're working on right now is what we call data fusion, the ability to mash that disparate data together, even if there's no direct linkage. That's a big project. That's our product roadmap. That's what's upcoming. We are working on that actively with a couple of companies. But generally right now, we use a company's existing linkage. So as much data as they have available. And so when we're making these predictions, it's based on what they know in the data. So the way to think about this is cross coverage. So let's say that you ran a survey of men and women and married and unmarried, and for some reason you had married men, married women, and single women, but you had no single men, right? Well, from that, the AI can still learn to predict those single men because it learns the difference between men and women, learns the difference between married and unmarried. And so that's what we call cross coverage. Now, that's a simplified example with just two variables, but we're doing this across average data set. It is anywhere from 100 to 400 variables. And so at that level of cross coverage is what allows us to predict for any given subcohort, subgroup, subpopulation within the survey population.
Got it. Well, I'm sure your historical experience and your relationships that you have with the companies over the last 10, 13, 15 years has helped a lot in terms of co-creating with clients and understanding what their needs are and how do you go about doing it. Have you hit a lot of I'm curious, what has been the response from clients in terms of, hey, this is on my roadmap, this is absolutely where I'm going, or let me wait and see. I'm not really sure if those are two extremes, but I'm curious what you're hearing and saying.
Both. I would say one being being a second time founder is great. I highly recommend it. It's a whole lot. It's a whole lot easier the
You
second
highly
time.
recommend the insanity. No, I'm just joking.
Yeah. It's better than being a first time founder.
That's true. That's true.
Is
Sure.
is the highest praise I can give it. But But we hear both. I mean, on one side, having been in on the CPG side, right? I have a bit of a reputation. I built difficult, hard technology before, and people said prove it, and it worked. So calling them again and saying I'm doing it again, right? I'm going to build something that's on the outer reaches of the technology frontier is we get taken a lot more seriously having built Gastrograph before this. But even with that, right, there's certainly a range of belief and disbelief. And I would say that 2 years ago, the disbelief was a lot stronger. People were like, why would I want synthetic data? How can I trust synthetic data? Why would I spend budget on synthetic data versus just going to collect more real data? It's like, well, you have that option now and you're not doing it. So we know the answer to that. And then on the other side, there were definitely people who said, well, I don't understand it. Explain it to me, right? And the big question that we get, and we still get a lot, is synthetic data fake? And our answer to that is no. That synthetic data is as real as its application. So, and the way that we help people understand this is when you go into ChatGPT and say, I'm too lazy, distracted, tired, uninspired, whatever your reason is, and you say like, draft, help me draft an email saying yes to this request. Help me draft an email politely saying no to this request, right? What it comes back with is text. And if you copy and paste that text, even if you edit it a little bit and, toss that in an email, that was synthetic. That was something that was generated. That was something that was not done by a human, right? So is that fake data? No, you used it, you sent it, right? So that is real data. So that data is just as real as its application. So when we think about is synthetic data fake, right? Well, it's a question of how well does the synthetic data that you're generating generalize to an existing population, to a real population. And I think a lot of the issue here, and synthetic data has somewhat bifurcated at this point, is that I would say for consumer and market research, that a lot of the LLM generated data does not generalize, does not match an existing population. Whereas the type of quantitative tabular synthetic data that we're doing based on empirical research provably does. And it's an interesting space to be in that we don't deal with unstructured text. We're not an LLM. We're not competing with LLMs. And yet, everyone's getting pitched on synthetic data by LLMs, and we have to say, well, we are synthetic data, but we're not that
Not based
type
on
of
an
synthetic.
LLM. Yeah, right.
Yeah,
Got it.
we're not that type of synthetic
That's
data.
interesting. It's well, I that's the first time I heard that example about real data versus fake data when you brought up the ChatGPT cut and paste into an email. My only point, I like the analogy, but the only point that I'd make is that in many instances the stakes are much lower, right? In terms of that value of that information. Like if I get the email wrong, I mean, hopefully it's not egregious or anything like that, but like it's okay if there's a small mistake. Whereas I think when people look at the notion of synthetic data, and I want to come back to the definition of that, the question then becomes, can I stand behind this and say, yes, this is the right direction to go in based on the data set that I'm seeing? So I guess I just wanted to ask you, is there a principle of how much synthetic data is generated to provide a response for a client? Does that make sense?
Maybe. So, so what, and like the average piece of consumer research that flows through our system is somewhere between 50 to 1,000 observations. Every once in a while, we'll get 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 complete study, and it'll have somewhere between say 30 and 400 variables. And so some of this research is pretty small, some of this research is pretty sizable. The amount of data that they can generate from that depends on the diversity of the population. So, if you have a very small targeted population, say that you were doing Hispanic American male beer consumers in the Southwestern United States, well, can you generate 5,000 people from an N equals 200 person study? Probably not. There's not a lot of there's not enough diversity to support that level of unique complete, which may or may not be an issue. If your target population can be approximated in an N equals 1,000 generation, like, great, more power to you. That's actually cheaper to run. On the other hand, if you're doing beer drinkers across the entire United States, right? And Asian Americans, African Americans, Hispanic Americans, Anglo-Saxons, Northeast, Southeast, right? The whole set of regions. Well, you're going to need a larger starting database. You're going to need a larger starting survey. Right? Hopefully, each of those areas will have coverage around 30, 40 individuals at least. And then you might be able to generate 10,000, 15,000, 20,000 observations from it. So our platform tries to help people balance the cost of larger generations versus the level of diversity in the beginning data, and helps them get an estimate for how much data they'll actually be able to generate versus how much data they need to generate to have good coverage.
That makes sense. I mean, it does go back to the same principles of weighting calibrations, right? If dependent, like you can't use a huge weight on a cell that's two people,
Right.
right?
Right.
So it's similar concept of being kind of responsible
Yeah. The
in terms
next
of how you're leveraging the data.
Exactly. It's the
Yeah,
next generation of that
correct.
technology.
Yeah. So I know when we spoke before, you felt like there was some confusion about synthetic data in the minds of potential buyers. I think it's it came onto the scene last year, maybe a year before, and it was all the buzz, and now it feels like it's balanced out a bit. I'm curious your perspective of how the market, the different variations of definitions, but then how the market is kind of accepting or embracing synthetic data.
Yeah, there are far too many definitions. I mean, you have the synthetic data, which is, particularly in LLMs alone, you have like 2 or 3 sides to synthetic data. You have synthetic data that's generated by an earlier version of an LLM in order to train a later version of an LLM. So we're running out of, human written text to train new models on. So now they have the LLM writing text that gets scored, and then they're training on top of that. Okay, well, that's synthetic data for training. Okay, well, then they have synthetic data coming out of the LLM, some of which is structured, and some of which is unstructured. So now you have structured outputs from LLM for synthetic data generation. Okay. And then you have these ideas of digital twins and digital personas, where you're doing either fine tuning, usually you're doing fine tuning, and then you're querying off of a fine tuned network. So all of that. And then on the other side, right, you have the more tabular focused synthetic data generation, which started with things like statistical copulas and simply sampling from distributions in the first generation, and then moved to GANs, generalized adversarial networks, where you have a generator and a discriminator. That worked a whole lot better than copulas, but took a lot of data to train, and you couldn't actually do conditions or scenario models on top of it. And then you have this third generation, which is what we're doing, which is using diffusion models for tabular synthetic data generation. And so by climbing up this technology ladder, we've gotten stronger guarantees from lower amounts of data, and we've enabled unique applications, particularly the ability to condition the generative network in order to get actually causal predictions for subpopulations or for interventions.
Right, and do clients understand it? Do they, um, are I'm curious what you hear from, clients or even prospects. They're like, "Nope, I don't buy this," or, "Yeah, this makes total sense."
Well, I think the idea of understanding versus purchasing is, yeah, I think so. I would certainly say that most customers are not very sophisticated in the range and diversity of synthetic data, and the different types and the different applications. So, one of the most common things we hear is that someone got pitched by a synthetic data company that said, "We're going to boost your sample size. We're going to take your data. We're going to boost your sample size. We're going to help you get more data." And they say, "Okay, but why would I want to do that? What new information am I going to get out of a larger sample?" Right? Well, okay, maybe you get some more statistical power. Maybe you can make stronger claims about smaller differences. And right? But for the most part, honestly, the value is not there in sample boosting. I think of sample boosting as something that's table stakes. And in theory, it might be helpful if you were training downstream models. But when you're talking to CPG companies or advertisers or marketers, that's not what they're doing. Right? The sample size isn't the problem. The problem is they didn't get the results they wanted. So how would a larger sample help them get? Yeah, it's not going to change the results, right? So in a way, I almost regret calling us a synthetic data company, because synthetic data is just a means for us to enable these scenario models. Um, and so we don't really think about using the platform for generic boosting. Sometimes we'll use it for conditional boosting. If you have a rare or low incidence cohort, if nursing mothers, for example, who don't respond to surveys, bartenders notoriously don't respond to surveys. A lot of various ethnic groups have very low response rates to surveys. And so it's difficult to get information from them. But, there's valuable niches, and these are not small niches, but for example, beer for Hispanic Americans, or snack foods for Asian Americans. These are quite large markets that are diverse and difficult to survey. And so the ability to say, well, if you have cross coverage, right? Okay, so you want to target nursing women. Nursing women don't respond to surveys. You can get some low level of responses from them, but you can get pregnant women, and you can get women with children who at some point in their lives were nursing women, and you can get these other cohorts. Okay, so now you have a lookalike or overlapping sets of groups, and you can put that into the platform. And now we can take the entire population, learn from the entire population to predict for a larger sample of the target population. And so in that way, that can suddenly become really useful, right? Because now you're talking about, whereas, before you had 22 people and not enough to make any statistical differences of, or even to trust the direction of those differences. Now you can learn from everyone and turn those 22 into a sample of 200 something. And you could say, okay, well, now I actually have a viable and robust sample that has guaranteed levels of convergence to make this prediction from.
Very interesting. I feel like every day there's something new, as it relates to what people are developing. Are you ever nervous that, like, you're working on this really cool, robust solution, but there's new startups coming in, the technology is accelerating at a rate and pace that's quite fast. Like, how do you balance those things as you think about your product roadmap? And I think it's difficult to, like, predict 100% which way tech is gonna go that will then shape our industry in major ways.
My biggest fear is that companies are going to use one of these LLM-based digital twins or synthetic data tools, synthetic persona tools, and they're gonna go in and say, "Show me people who are young and active and currently drink Pepsi that we can convert to Coca-Cola." And they're gonna get back a bunch of information that looks and reads really good, and they're gonna go make decisions on it, and it's not gonna work, right? And, is it not working good for me eventually? Yes, but but I mean, that's gonna delay our buying cycle by a year or whatever. So that's my biggest fear. And I think some companies have become wiser to this than others. But I would say, more aggregate level on the technology question, I am nervous every time I see the launch of a new synthetic data company. And every time I go and look and I read their website, and it's just keep reading their docs until I figure out whether or not it's based on a foundation model. And if it's based on a publicly open source foundation model, then it's fine. They're going to have 20 other competitors. They already have 20 other competitors. And there's all these claims that they're using some type of proprietary supervised fine
Proprietary, yeah.
tuning. But it's just not the case. We know the leading edge foundation models are now at a couple, what is it, like 100 billion, 200 billion parameters. China just released a model that was a trillion parameter model. And then these companies are claiming, okay, well, I have my 3 million row proprietary database that I'm going to fine tune on. It's like, so you think your 3 million is going to somehow overpower the inherent biases of a 1 trillion parameter model, right? The whole reason the LLM companies are generating synthetic data is because there's not enough real data anymore, and even in order to train these models. And you're talking about using your sampling of proprietary data that is somehow going to be relevant and up to date and have the right questions and the right context for whatever consumer market research these companies are doing. I just don't buy it. And so yeah, that's why.
Yeah. And it sounds like you have a lot of competitive research to do every day based on these other startups and just learn about what's going on. I think everybody's trying to do that just to keep up and understand, how fast is this moving.
Yeah, it's
Well, listen, Jason, it was great to have you on the show. I'm glad you still like your tea habit.
nonstop.
And I look forward to keeping in touch with you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. This was amazing.
Thank you.